Recently, I watched an interview with Anthony Burgess, who is the author of Clockwork Orange, and he made some interesting points. He talked about his book, but specifically, he got into something that was, I guess, philosophically relevant to the novel, which was the idea that well, he thinks that if men were really left, if human beings were left to their own devices, we would choose evil over good. He even made a very funny analogy or argument. It's like, well, if you had to choose between watching Twelfth Night or watching heretics get burned at the stake, we would probably watch the heretics get burned at the stake. That there's this naturally sort of more wild, more perverse side of us. And I do see his point. I mean, I do, I'm not going to totally disagree with him, and I see how that does play out definitely in the movie, the Clockwork Orange. I want to read the book at some point. However, though, I do see also how an idea like that could be weaponized by many of the people who, in positions of power, like many of the people, as you see in the Clockwork Orange, who are responsible for creating this whole, this big mess that they basically create of having the crime-ridden city be almost like a symbiotic sort of feedback loop, sort of a symbiotic relationship between the crime-ridden city and the people in power who are perpetuating it. It all sort of plays again this sort of very symbiotic kind of relationship, and I can see how, like in many authoritarian states and in many authoritarian worlds that you see in these dystopian novels, that they can use the idea that human beings are inherently selfish, that there's an animal nature that needs to be controlled as an excuse to establish a kind of a hierarchy, that certain people were, as I guess Rodion Raskolnikov points out in Crime and Punishment, certain people are born to utter a new word, as he points out, and create a new movement and establish a hierarchy of their own and dominate. And while other people who were more slaves to their own animal nature and their own inadequacies will never really rise to the occasion, will never be able to actually do any of those things. But as I pointed out before in some of my other videos, you see that there are parallels with that and like Freudianism and also Christianity. It's like in Freudianism there's the idea of the id, like your own sort of repressed animal nature, and also in Christianity things are even phrased in that way of the spiritual, intellectual life having to govern or repress, your primitive nature, and so that you can see a pattern in different types of authoritarianism that are out there. But I think there's one example from the movie, The Clockwork Orange, that has always haunted me. So there's one scene where Malcolm McDowell's character, Alex DeLarge, he has been reformed, I guess, so to speak, by this horrible, what we call Ludovico technique, because I'm pretty sure all of you know the very iconic, famous scene where he's strapped to the chair and he's given drugs. He's drugged as he watches these horrible, violent things happening to people on the screen. And so that's supposed to deter him from evil by creating a really repulsive, nauseating association with it, because the drugs make him physically ill, they make him mentally ill. And so after he's been reformed, he goes to visit his dad, and this new guy that's moved in to his place, who knows about all the crimes that he's committed, and really tears him down in front of his dad. There is something that's very satisfying about watching it. But Malcolm McDowell's character is very cocky, and there's something even scarier about him. I remember somebody even pointed out in the comment section when I watched the scene that he's been scarier after he's been reformed. And that scene obviously really haunted me because, as I pointed out, in many of these sort of European movies, they always have a way of adding a sort of a charm to things that you watch, so even when they're the most horrific kinds of things. You can't really get that as much in an American movie. but there's always something that you can't help but you feel an affinity for it, and that makes you want to continue watching it.